This is Taylor Mason, and I'm here today with Senator, Nikil Saval. This is an ongoing oral history project on the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus and its impact on members, staff, and senators. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for doing this.
So just tell me a little bit background about yourself before you got to the Senate.
Sure. So I'm an Indian American. My family immigrated from India in 1970, first to New Mexico and then to Los Angeles, which is where I was born. I was born in Los Angeles, 1982. My family came with science backgrounds and worked in the sciences, but actually in the 80s opened a pizza restaurant. And I sort of grew up in and around that pizza restaurant in Los Angeles. It was I think an experience that shaped me pretty profoundly, in the sense that there were just everyone who came to the restaurant, who worked in the restaurant, were immigrants of different backgrounds. And so I learned from an early age just the importance of solidarity with, working class people of color across the citizenship spectrum, across, regardless of national origin and the like. I went to college in New York City at Columbia University. I studied English. Worked in book publishing, and eventually went to graduate school in the Bay Area at Stanford did a PhD in English. I during that time though became interested in anti-war activism and just generally organizing. I learned and read a lot about the history of Black liberation, of the anti-war movement. At the time, the Iraq War was going on and was, hugely scary and destabilizing. I was very profoundly shaken by the fact that the United States had invaded a country essentially on the flimsiest of pretexts, and so sort of turned to the past in order to understand it. And when I was in graduate school, I began volunteering with a union called Unite Here, which represents hospitality workers. And that was my first experience of being part of a mass organization of, again, people of varying backgrounds, diverse backgrounds that had power in a city. And so learned to organize in that context. Subsequently moved to Philadelphia in 2011. My partner went to graduate school at UPenn. I continued to organize with Unite Here, became professionally involved as a freelance journalist. That was my day job. I wrote for the New York Times and the New Yorker on architecture and design. I wrote a book called Cubed, which is the history of office work and white collar work. In 2016, I became involved in the Bernie Sanders campaign. I canvassed with Bernie Sanders, founded a progressive organization in the aftermath of that campaign called Reclaim Philadelphia. And we helped recruit and organize candidates for local office, including district attorney, state representative, city council. I helped organize people to run for local Democratic committee person elections, was elected ward leader in the 2nd ward in South Philadelphia. And in 2020, was asked to and decided to run for state Senate in the 1st Senate district, and was elected in 2020.
Okay. So you're in the Senate now. So what has been your experience being a person of color in the Senate? Do you think you've had to do anything differently to get your bills noticed on the floor, or anything along those lines, just to get a perspective of what it's like being someone in the Senate who's a person of color?
I'd say that I'm still reflecting on that experience, so I don't know how conclusive my ideas can be. And then the other odd thing has been my first year of, the first 6 months of the job, essentially, we're under kind of COVID condition. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I was on Zoom. So in a way, being in the Senate has been being in my basement, on Zoom I had a baby in April. And so of 2021. But that said, I would say that it was really, my experience coming into the Senate was principally that there is a kind of latitude given, I would say, it's a very white institution, heavily male institution.
Mhm.
And there are only 4 members of color besides myself in the institution, and I hope that will change. There are many more, even though proportionally, I don't know if it accounts for much more in the House. But I would just say that there is a kind of latitude given to white members of the organization, and a presumption that that is not necessarily given to the members of color. It's hard to point to examples of that. It's hard to point to experiences that clearly point to it. But I think there's just there isn't a wide knowledge of. It's more like there isn't a wide knowledge of the diversity in the Commonwealth. There isn't a wide knowledge, not just the diversity purely in terms of color, but in terms of national origin, language background, religion, all of which tend to correlate to being a person of color, but aren't exclusive to that experience. So I just feel like it's mostly that there's just like, it's an institution that is fairly oblivious to the diversity of experiences that take place in the Commonwealth. I think it's not a body that is necessarily welcoming of new people, and like we need, or not a state rather. Again, in most of these experiences, we're running for office, but there is a big presumption that you should be from Pennsylvania, that you should be from Philadelphia. And people say things like, well, you're not from here, they'll observe where you are from. And that shades into xenophobia, I think, very quickly. Again, I feel like that's been more an experience in running for office than has been in the Senate. But I think, otherwise the Senate has been actually relatively welcoming, I would say. And it helps to have, I've had great comradeship among other members of color in the Senate. And I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, this kind of is a good transition then to talk about your district. And as I did your research, you're the first Asian American to represent the first Senate district in Pennsylvania. So what has that meant to you personally or to the district as a whole? Both.
I would say to me personally, it's not an experience I think about on a daily basis, and I probably should, but actually it occurs to me more when other Asian Americans, mention it to me, when they experience a kind of moment of recognition. And that moment is I guess I would say intersubjective, to use like some philosophical jargon, but I would just like that I suddenly experience that recognition myself then when I speak to other Asian Americans, where they're like, oh, you're the only Asian American in the Senate, or you're one of the few, and one of 2 in the legislature, or what have you. And I'm like, you're right, like that's the experience. And like, what do we do with it? What do we make out of it? How do we make that meaningful? It's so that I would say has been the primary experience. And then I would say that I feel it incumbent on me, and it's not hard, to represent the diversity of the district, especially that kind of Asian American diversity insofar, but I think it applies across the board, right? Just the diversity linked with of national origin, ethnicity, race. It's one of the most diverse districts across the board. Language, I think, is like a form of diversity that we tend not to speak enough about. That not everyone's primary language is English, and so wanting to be able to, do work in the district that is, supports people of different national origins. So we have very good have developed relationships with the Cambodian community, the Vietnamese community, there's a Bangladeshi community, not principally centered in the first district. but, I think I just want to be able to help people get past the barriers that they face, again, because of their race, because of where they come from, because of what language they speak, in order to thrive in the district. And so I feel like it's incumbent on me to do that. And there aren't a lot of models. It's sort of easy to figure out what that looks like. I mean, I don't know quite, I don't always know where to turn, where I feel like we're trying to figure it out as we go. So it's different. I won't say that it's easy. I think it's difficult, but I think I want more people to kind of do it with me. But it's a great privilege. It's a great honor. But I think we're still figuring it out.
Okay. So you kind of hinted at this a little bit, but your relationship with your predecessors, did you have any sort of like mentor role with any of them? Did you get to talk to any of your predecessors when you were running for office, or did they help you learn the legislative process, anything like that, or not at all?
My predecessors in this seat?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
No, they have not been supportive.
Okay. We've been asking because sometimes, a member retires.
Yeah. No.
So that's what I've been asking everybody. So.
No, of course. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. So moving down to the Black Caucus itself, and maybe you don't have as much to add because as you mentioned, you've only been here a little over a year or two. But what has been your involvement so far with the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus?
Well, I'd say that it's been less as an organization and more the Black members of the Senate have been hugely helpful in navigating the dynamics of the Senate. In particular, Senators Street, Williams, Hughes, and Haywood have been big mentors to me, and they're often the people I can count on to speak up in caucus meetings, that is in Democratic caucus meetings, when there are issues that affect people of color that I feel like that those issues people aren't recognizing the fact that they have an unequal impact on people of color. They will support my view of that. I mean, they understand, I think there's a ready understanding, especially when it comes to the criminal justice system, where, and actually this goes back to maybe your previous point about it being a person of color in the Senate. I think it's sort of difficult to speak about race very forthrightly in that setting. And I just need, it's the members of color who more readily speak about it. So it's been less as a caucus, less the PLBC and more not. This is just the truth. I mean, and I'm quite grateful to be a member of the PLBC, but my day-to-day experiences with the members of the PLBC who are in the Senate, I would say, has been the principal support for me.
Okay. So what are some issues you're hoping maybe that group of senators in the Senate, or as the PLBC as a whole, what are some issues you're hoping to tackle in the next future session or in the next couple of years to finish your term?
I would hope that we really tackle issues around housing and affordable housing, that we recognize those issues to be issues that certainly in a lot of our major cities and, in third-class cities and things like that, and townships, very deeply and unequally impact people of color. For example, the fact that, people of color are still more likely to be denied conventional home loans. They're more likely, they lack generational wealth because they've lacked access to housing for many years and have been unable, they need home repairs and maintenance supports, in order to be able to pass on housing that they currently have to future generations. We are in a situation where people are actually, in Philadelphia in particular, people are leaving the city of Philadelphia, people of color, Black residents rather, in particular, are leaving the city. I hope those are issues that, I think they have a lot to do with housing. They have to do with other things as well. Anti-violence initiatives, the state of public schools in the city. I hope that all of those things are connected, I believe, but I think that we need to, I think the fight for fair and equitable access to housing and sustainable access to housing, I think is a major fight of our time, and a fight that the Black Caucus should take on. I also think that we should be thinking about the continuing impacts of climate change on our communities. And so can we fight for, clean energy? Can we fight to reduce and eventually eliminate our reliance on fossil fuel extraction? Those are the two things that I think we should take on as racial and economic and environmental justice issues.
Okay. Those were actually my questions, unless there's anything else you'd like to talk about, whether other issues you're working on in the Senate, or relationships with House members or senators. So it's pretty open-ended, whatever you'd like to add on if you have anything.
No, I think we covered it.